As Africa faces growing pressure from climate change, from prolonged droughts in the Horn of Africa to devastating floods in parts of southern and West Africa, the question of how the continent finances its climate response has become increasingly urgent. Yet Africa contributes less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, whilst bearing some of the most severe impacts. Against this backdrop, the inaugural Africa Matters Summit taking place on the 25th of March in Johannesburg will bring together policymakers, experts and business leaders to discuss solutions, particularly around climate finance and Africa's energy transition. Well, to give us a preview of the discussions, we're now joined by Dr Kwame Ababio, who's a carbon markets expert at the African Union Development Agency's NEPAD and one of the summit's panelists. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for welcoming me.
To you. Dr. Ababio, Africa contributes only a fraction of the global greenhouse emissions, yet the continent is amongst the most vulnerable to climate change, feeling its effects, devastating effects. From your perspective, I'm wondering, how fair is the current global climate finance system for Africa?
Well, once again, thank you, Peter, for the opportunity to speak on this very important subject matter. And honestly, it's a question that I wish more people were asking out aloud. Climate finance, certainly on the continent, is one that Africa, as you rightly stated, is the least contributor to the global greenhouse gas emissions. And at the end of the day, it's one of the most affected by far. But if you look at the amount of climate finance that comes in, it's really, really inadequate to meet the needs, the expectations of a continent that has for a very long time been hampered by the effects of climate change. If you look at the narrative, for instance, the estimate is that between 2020 and 2030, the continent requires about $2.3 trillion of climate finance. However, on a yearly basis, we just get about 12% of that amount. So typically that would have translated into $250 billion per year. But on the average, we get about just 12% of that amount, which is wholly inadequate to meet the climate challenges that the continent faces. But I think over and above everything, this should not be a cry in despair. We are a continent on the move. We've seen a lot of actions that are being taken, both in terms of energy transitions, in terms of looking at innovative climate financing. So we should rather see the cup as half full rather than half empty. I think there is a lot of progress that is being made across the continents.
I mean, can we do a lot? Can we, do we have sufficient resources to be able to do this despite the unfairness of the climate financing scenario?
Yes, I think Africa is extraordinarily well-resourced for this moment. And I think sometimes we forget that. We hold the world's best solar potential. For instance, South Africa's Karoo receives more sunlight per square meter than almost anywhere else on Earth. We have world-class wind, solar, hydro, and geothermal resources. And so, in addition to our vast critical mineral resources that are essential for the green transition. So the strategic shift Africa needs to make is to move from being an exporter of these raw materials to the manufacturer of solutions. We should not just be mining these minerals for solar minerals, but bringing in the requisite expertise in country to be able to process them for value addition, or as is more frequently referred to, for beneficiation. For instance, here in South Africa, the green hydro potential is massive, it's huge. And green hydrogen is very important for fertilizer production, for instance. Over 90% of Africa's fertilizers are imported. If we are able to translate this into domestic production, that is jobs being created, that is revenue that countries are earning. So the potential is really huge on the continent, and it's just about translating sometimes some of these policies into real actions, and that will require a whole of government approach. For us to look at climate change environment not as a sectoral issue, but one that is embedded in the different sectoral, the different whole of government approach to ensure that climate change environmental concerns are embedded into hardcore policy making processes.
You're one of the panelists there. What's going to be important for you to communicate?
Yes, so I think this platform is a very, very important one. And platforms such as this move the conversation from just policy documents, government reports, to making climate change one of a personal issue. For many Africans, climate change is existential. It threatens our very livelihood. So these are the kind of things that we would want to see being channeled at this summit to really bring climate change home to the average African, to discuss the issues that affect us. I mean, across the continent, I believe that this Africa Matters discussion can connect listeners to the African innovators, farmer associations, entrepreneurs, and particularly young people who are already building climate solutions. For instance, when you hear listeners people tell their stories from Joburg to Nairobi to Lagos to Lusaka, you hear that climate change actions are being deployed at the local levels. What is needed is a scaling up. So it's important to hear local solutions, what young people are doing, so that these are translated into policy actions and decisions at the national and local levels.
And finally, if African leaders and investors leave the summit with one key message about climate finance and energy transition, what would that message be?
The message is that, yes, we recognize that for a very long time, the continent has been shortchanged when it comes to climate finance, climate change, but we are solution providers. The continent can provide solutions. We have the resources to be able to do so, both natural and human resources to be able to turn around the story. And I think that's a take-home message that I would want to see coming out of this summit. The continent is primed. The continent is ready for investments. What is needed is a policy coherence that connects health, education, infrastructure, all the various sectors to, with climate change being the central focus or the central theme. And I believe once that is done, we will be able to take off as a continent and leverage the new massive opportunities that the continent has, particularly in reference to the Africa Free Continental Trade Area and the other opportunities that exist on the continent for the African entrepreneurs and also for policymakers to give the right direction.
Dr. Ababio, thank you so much indeed for joining us, and I look forward to meeting you on the 25th.
Thank you, Peter, and it's great joining you on this program. Thank you.
That's Dr. Kwame Ababio, who's a carbon expert at the African Union's Development Agency, NEPAD, and he's one of the panelists at the Africa Matters Summit taking place on the 25th of March in Johannesburg. Be a part of the conversation. It's 8:30 Central African Time, which means it's time for your news headlines. Good morning, Chanduko Ligege.